Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm, and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto became Earth's last guardian after the Z Fighters fell. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time. Let's start the story.
1 year later. Yeah, I'm thinking of shaving my head again. Don't do that, I don't like baldies, remember? He laughed. Geez, after all this time you still wouldn't accept me when I'm bald? The shininess of your head is distracting. I don't even know what that means. Get the fuck out of the house. Fine, love you too. Krillin sighed, picked up his jacket, and left as always. 18 was hard to please later on. He might take her to a fancy dinner should she be speaking to him. He had intended to train today anyhow, but he said, "You think I would know her better by now?" Oh well, up here, there wasn't much else to do. He saw powerful fighters everywhere he looked. As was customary, the majority of them had been up here for longer than anyone could remember, training continuously and growing stronger. So time was not on his side. All of these fighters, like the majority of Z fighters, were able to preserve their bodies after death. He raised his gaze to the halo that hovered over his own head. It was better to be dead than he had anticipated. Krillin sighed and kicked the dirt, saying, "I wonder if Goku is around. He really is the best training partner. I'm so lame. I bet he's busy. Probably still in training so he can take on Beerus. When was the last time I saw him?" He observed that a sizable group of people were gathered around a fight up ahead, and many others were watching while floating in the air. Curious, Krillin floated upward to gain a clear view. Urupnop, a reptilian extraterrestrial from the east quadrant of the universe, was engaged in combat with the most peculiar of characters. There were many issues with it, but it reminded him of a Cell Jr. It had a snout-like face, and the points on his head had grown oddly crooked, resembling giant ears. The only part of its body that was still Cell's original color was its face, which was smirking and dancing around Urupnop's best efforts. It rolled to the left, stood, and joyfully drove its clawed hand into the lizardman's chest over its head. There was no halo. "It's alive. It doesn't have a halo. What is that thing?" Glancing to his side, Krillin noticed Tien standing beside him. "Is it just me or does it look a lot like Cell?" The Triclops said, "You think so too?" Urupnop let out a cry of agony as a previously concealed tail penetrated him and started to drain his vitality. Tien leapt to his feet and charged at the Cell-like figure. Two more tails appeared behind the small figure's back as it turned to face him with a fox-like grin. Each had a thick tail that tapered down to a black needle point after being completely covered in red fur. The third tail hit Tien before he could dodge, sending him sprawling to the ground, while the second tail joined the first in depleting Urupnop's energy. By this point, Urupnop was nearly exhausted, and his only option was to turn to face Krillin and hurl his drooping arm at him. That's it, now is the moment to act. A spinning, razor-sharp disc of ki appeared on the palm of Krillin's hand as he raised it and gathered energy. Destructo disc. The projectile swiveled to a vertical position, slicing through the lizardman's two embedded tails before soaring upward to avoid slicing anyone in the crowd. Urupnop was soon taken away to be saved by a medic after the other fighters interpreted this as a signal to move. Tien was one of several fighters who dogpiled the Cell Jr. It was still grinning at them all, its razor-sharp teeth exposed, but it was now motionless. "What are you? How did you get into heaven?" Krillin asked as he approached it. The little monster mockingly exclaimed, "I'm a brand new life, no sin in me. We're all coming to get you, ya know, should be any second now." "What do you mean?" The heavens split open above their heads, a gaping, screaming hole opened up into the depths of HFIL. The Cell Jr. laughed at them all and said, "The cavalry have arrived." A red wave started to emerge from the rip in the sky, rippling and diverging. They all started to flare their ki at the small beast they were still dogpiling. "He's signaling it." Suddenly, the massive red stream veered in their direction. As Krillin got closer, he could see that it was a swarm of flying monsters, none of which were exactly alike. Some resembled foxes, while others were more like Cell, and they were all aimed directly at him. Krillin instantly remembered the age of 18, who was probably still sitting in his kitchen, still furious that he would even think about shaving his head. No matter where he ended up after this, he would miss her. "We don't let those monsters get anywhere. We stop them here. If we can't stop a bunch of monsters invading our homes, then what have we been training for?" Krillin yelled as they watched the approaching horde. Many of the fighters who had been questioning themselves had now made the decision to stand and fight. "But please, someone, anyone who knows that they are extremely fast, alert the Grand Kai and go get Goku." This was the signal for several warriors to take off. Before 6 more tails shot out of his back, impaling multiple fighters, the Cell Jr. said, "You guys should have ran while you had a chance. At least those cowards had some brains." Tien caught a tail through the chest, and Krillin saw it happen. The Triclops dropped to the floor as other fighters started to try to deal with the Cell Jr. in front of them. Krillin shook his head. Kaioken X75 would be the strength of just one of them. To avoid raising suspicions, she walked deliberately and as quickly as she could. When anyone in Takikakure saw her hurrying, they would start to worry or actually engaging in any activity other than passively gazing off into the distance. Not much could be said about it. It was merely a fact of existence. It had always been the case that she had very few people to talk to. She had never really acted out, so her minders mostly ignored her. If anything, her friendliness had gotten her into more trouble than her outbursts. The icy treatment she received from others served only as a reminder of her responsibility and burden. The previous village chief explained to her that she was there to protect Takikakure before he passed away. Her life was for the village, regardless of her own emotions and desires. She was viewed as an annoyance rather than a threat. Her feet were covered in a glossy layer of chakra as she finally reached a canal that had been excavated as a shortcut out of the village and stepped onto the water. After some trial and error, the glow subsided. Damn, still using too much. Being as silent as she could, she proceeded through the passage. She was using this exit, which was a little illegal, but she didn't seem to care. Her village owed her more than a subpar corridor. She eventually left the confines of her home and returned to the outside world, away from the enormous tree that seemed to be at her back all the time, in the middle of the village, away from everyone who didn't want anything to do with her. As usual, she reasoned that if she began training, Naoki would eventually visit her. He wouldn't come if she didn't train. It was strange, something she didn't fully comprehend. She then moved some distance away from the passage's conclusion and started doing some simple exercises. She heard Naoki's well-known greeting, "Fu-chan." As she started to exert herself, she grinned and looked up to see her blonde friend floating in the air above her. "Naoki, you need to teach me how to fly like you," she said, stamping her foot. He landed a few feet from her after laughing. "You say that every time you see me." Naoki continued to laugh. "Why can't you show me?" Fu leaned forward and gave him a shoulder slap, saying, "Ah, shut up. Piccolo says I can't. It's kind of a big secret. Yano, do you see anyone else flying?" "No, but that's why I want to learn." Laughing, Naoki added, "That's also why I can't teach you. You're always laughing at me." He smiled and said, "You're funny, that's why." She immediately placed him in a headlock, and despite his best efforts to free himself by flailing his arms, she continued to ground her fist into his head. It was a Jinchuriki Nugi, one of the deadliest types, made even more lethal by a woman's righteous rage and fury. "Stop, stop, stop." She let him go, and he dropped to the floor, saying, "Fine." "Ouch, so violent. Piccolo is the guy who teaches you?" she asked abruptly after Fu had been staring at him for a good minute and he was starting to feel uncomfortable. Yeah, him and Popo, they train me in different things." Naoki nodded and said, "So, he was the one who taught you how to fly. Where do you live again? I can't believe it's so close to my village and we don't know about it." Why the sudden curiosity? After a slight scowl, she turned her head away and said, "I don't know, it's just that you're so mysterious all the time. I just want to know more about you." He chuckled, "You already know plenty about me, don't sweat that kind of stuff." "Ugh, you just don't get it." Naoki was attempting to ascertain the exact nature of the situation. In some ways, girls like Ino were much easier to deal with because they were constantly expressing their feelings, but Fu occasionally had a tendency to keep things to herself. That was how he and Fu were alike. "Fine. I left my home village 5 years ago. I won't tell you which one." She sighed. "And I came to live here with Piccolo and Popo so that they could train me. My home is up there in the sky. Your village is pretty much right under it." "I see." This was quite unbelievable, but she was able to suspend her disbelief because Naoki always flew down to welcome her. "So your house floats?" He couldn't think. "I wonder if they would mind if I," he said, scrutinizing Fu with a critical gaze before moving in close circles around her as though checking for defects. When he started staring into her ears, she yelled, "What?" He was so shocked that he almost toppled over. "You aren't from one of the 5, are you?" Fu looked at him sharply. "No, I'm from a minor village. Is that a problem?" "Nah," he said with a smile, "they'll love you. You're going to take me up there?" "Yeah, why not?" he said. "Hop on," as he assumed the piggyback position. Fu was flushed. "What? There's no other way?" After giving it some thought, Naoki placed his hands in the bridal carry position. "Better?" She gave him a brief glance as she considered this novel strategy. "No, the first one is kind of better but not much." As he took off into the sky, she climbed onto his back and clung to his shoulders, saying, "Just get on." He increased the speed after allowing her a few seconds to adjust to flying. Fu screamed. This was a bad idea. "Slow down," and put her arms around his neck to better support herself. Kami's lookout was about 7 miles up, so it was accurate to say, "We're going up really high, so that would take forever." "How high?" Her grip around his neck had turned into a headlock, and her legs were digging into his sides. Fu was choking to death when he said, Calm down, I do this every day. The flight was going to be lengthy. Jiraiya approached his 3 students and calmly evaluated them. He was proud of the work he accomplished with the 3 during their 3 years as his students, and he had raised his share of young shinobi. Shikamaru's training went smoothly despite being a genius. The boy was the easiest to control because he consistently took the easiest route. You had to give Shikamaru an even worse option in order to get him to finish any task. You would force him to complete 200 push-ups if he refused to complete 100. If he ever refuses to perform 100 again, you can threaten him with 200, and he will perform 100 without any issues. Actually, Yoshino had been the only thing he had troubled with when training Shikamaru. One evening, following an especially demanding day of training for her son, her mother's intuition had led her to him. He was at the type of dive bar he enjoyed, where working women were present. When she approached him, good whores were scarce because brothels were viewed negatively in the village while he was away from the village. It was simpler to obtain women the proper way. Almost all of the women in Konoha avoided him because they knew he was a ridiculous pervert. When Yoshino entered the bar, her appearance was inappropriate for the setting. The smoky, dimly lit interior and dingy walls stood in sharp contrast to the welcoming woman who entered. He assumed that because he stood out in a place like this, her eyes found him right away, or really any location. She smiled and greeted him, saying, "Jiraiya-sama, it's good to see you after so long." After chuckling and sipping some sake, he patted the seat beside him. After glancing up and down her body for a while, Yoshino rolled her eyes and said, "Come on, don't be such a stick in the mud. Since it hasn't been that long, you can disregard the formalities." She asked, "Jiraiya, you perverted bastard, how are you still alive?" As she sat down at the bar beside him and placed an order for a drink. "Fine. We both understand that I'm stronger than that. Anyone who wants to take a piece out of Ola Jiraiya isn't he going to walk away?" After trying he gave her his trademark sardonic smile and, just for good measure, tapped her on the butt. "I meant to say, how come you haven't been killed by a woman you invited into your bed by now? You're thinking with the wrong organ, my friend, which is a serious concern. If a kunoichi were to slit your throat one day while you were copulating, I wouldn't be shocked." The toad sage was nothing short of arrogant, saying, "Any woman who has gotten close enough to assassinate me has already changed her mind. The allure of Jiraiya is a very real thing, my dumpling. You are revolting. You're forgetting all the times I saved your ass while you were on my squad," Jiraiya said, gesturing to the bartender to get him more sake since his had run out. "Do you recall how I used to frequently sink you in the mud, earning you the nickname Doroshino one?" After taking a swig of the gin and tonic she had ordered, Yoshino laughed and said, "You did save me a lot for a while there." "That's right, nothing can bring me down, I'm Jiraiya. Anyway, as usual, you're just an obstinate pervert. You continue to be a stick in the mud. Doroshino is the ideal moniker for you." "Enough with the past, I'm here about my son," she said with a sly smile. "Shikamaru is developing nicely." He studied her for a few moments, but not in a sultry way. "You're here to get me to go easier on him," he said, looking at Yoshino intently. "At first, I couldn't get him to do anything physical, but we got that straightened out early. I am much more familiar with Shikamaru than you are, and although the additional work benefits him, he is on the verge of complete burnout." Yoshino shook her head, saying, "You're running him into the ground because he spends so much energy thinking that physical exertion is particularly heinous for him. That is precisely the moment I am striving for. Shikamaru will always train as long as he is a shinobi after he understands what true exhaustion is and confronts his limitations." "What gives you such confidence in that?" "It's simply a characteristic of his personality. He has avoided work and genuine effort his entire life, and he usually gets away with it. However, I show him that no matter how intelligent he is, someone stronger can always come along and force their will on you. I'm giving him an excuse to gain authority." After a little more discussion, she agreed to the response, but informed him that she would keep him at home tomorrow regardless of the Sanin's wishes. Jiraiya knew better than to try to meddle with a mother who believed she was defending her child, and Shikamaru was given his day off. The boy was made to regret it during his subsequent training session. Shikamaru eventually reached a breaking point and, in a fit of rage, tried to fight Jiraiya himself. This was completely out of character for the lazy genius, but as expected, he was unable to handle Jiraiya's commanding style of training for very long. Jiraiya beat him up badly, and he learned that strength was valuable and the only way to fight those who would force their will on him. Shikamaru never dragged his feet during training again. The only problem with getting him strong enough to fight Naruto when the time came was that it was expensive to get rare enough bugs to give him the advantage. Shino, the Aburame clan member he trained, was obedient and pliable during training and quickly learned most of what Jiraiya tried to teach him during physical work. He completed the task asked of him in silence and returned asking for more. In order to find the rarest and deadliest insects possible, Jiraiya called in a number of favors from all over the elemental nations. The most expensive of these could have been the extremely rare drilling beetles of the Mizu no Kuni marshes, which were known to kill humans and large animals by boring into their prey with the sharp ram on their heads, then rotating themselves with their countless long legs to dig into the animal's flesh. Once they had made a hole in the skin, they would consume the victim from the inside out while they were still alive. For once, Jiraiya could see the joy on the Abarame's face as Shino thanked him profusely for the species, claiming that happiness could be found in the small things in life. Regarding Sasuke, even after 3 years of training, the boy still couldn't stand him. He had grown stronger, but his attitude remained the same, petulant and unhappy, and he was staring at him with disgust, waiting impatiently for him to say something. Maybe today he would discover that he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. At last, Jiraiya said, "Let me begin by saying that our training together has come to an end." Shino appeared to be the only one who felt regret. The elder shinobi said, "Trust me, I'm just as torn up about it as you guys are." Shikamaru and Sasuke both gave a whoop of joy at the news. After giving them a chance to express their opinions, he said, "But there is something you need to know. I've been lying to you about the true purpose of this program for the past 3 years." Shikamaru's shoulders slumped as if he simply knew that whatever was happening would be troublesome, and Shino kind of twitched, which for the bug enthusiast was a profound display of emotion. Sasuke's eyes widened considerably and he appeared angry. Big shock there. "You were informed that you 3 would battle Naruto, but in reality, only one of you will travel to the Gate no Kuni, Land of Cliffs. To do so, the others will remain with Hokage's entourage and serve as a backup in the event of foul play. The selected fighter will be promoted to Chunin immediately." "Let me go," said Sasuke, stepping forward. "I have to advance as fast as I can." "Boy, that means nothing to me." Jiraiya gave him a stern look and said, "My goal is to get Naruto home safely by getting one of you to defeat one of him so that we can win this tournament. Your desires and mine are not the same. Naturally, after I kill that alien, I don't care about your trivial desire for vengeance." Sasuke and his sensei were at odds once more, but he had long since discovered that Jiraiya's will could not be compromised. "In any case, we'll choose who goes. In the most straightforward manner you will engage in combat. Naruto will face the last person standing." Shikamaru raised his hand and declared, "I forfeit." "You are unable to forfeit." Jiraiya laughed directly in front of the Nara, saying, "I won't let you. I'll train you for the rest of my life. If I see you slacking or holding back in any way during this fight, I'll keep your ass to the grindstone for as long as I live, no matter what it takes." Shikamaru appeared ill. "I guess taking a chance at having to fight in the tournament is better than being stuck with you for any longer than I have to." "Well, why aren't you boys fighting?" Jiraiya said, turning away from his pupils and sitting on a nearby tree stump, too. After a tense moment in which the young Blade Program students looked at one another, the 3 of them took off in different directions. Apparently, Naruto was bringing that girl he wasted time with up onto the lookout. This would be quite an ordeal. Popo was going to be Piccolo's side and got up from his meditation. "That idiot! How could he endanger us like this? That girl is already a Chunin for Takigakure, and as a shinobi it could be disastrous if she told her superiors where we were. The shinobi would arrive at our door after they sold the information to the highest bidder." "We'll deal with that if it happens," the Namekian said, raising a hand in an attempt to interrupt Popo's tirade before he could really get going. "Naruto ought to be given the opportunity to relax and socialize. Over the past 5 years, we have asked him a lot of questions. We have to rely on the strength we've been able to give him thus far because the tournament is in a week. I suppose, but this is still an unnecessary risk to our safety." Popo sighed. "I will have to speak to this girl and ensure she knows what is at stake." "That's what you do. I need to take care of some urgent issues." Popo called up to Piccolo, who appeared unhappy as he started to float upward. "The Akatsuki. You were right, they're dangerous." Popo shook his head at that. What else could he do? Piccolo had been influenced by whatever parasite it was when he had put the tournament together, and the Akatsuki's place in the Tenkaichi Budokai had long been determined, and Popo knew full well that the other humans would not be pleased to see all of their worst criminals in one place. A familiar mass of long blonde spikes appeared over the rim of the lookout, and Naruto's carefree expression was wiped from his face as he saw Popo's. Despite his mind racing with all the ways that they were unquestionably fucked, he did not have to wait. With wide, orange eyes, the girl unwrapped her arms around him and asked, "What is that?" "While I do understand your attraction to her, this girl is an unwarranted risk," Popo remarked, surveying Fu's appearance. She had washed out green hair, which reminded him of Bulma in some way. The lightness of her hair contrasted sharply with her deeply tanned skin. Despite her youth, her body already demonstrated the fruits of her training as a kunoichi, as she was in remarkable shape. Even though she was in shock, her sharp features were quite striking. Given explanation. "Fu has a friend." He reacted to the suggestion embedded in Popo's statement. He didn't want Fu getting the wrong idea after all. Just a friend. But I brought her up here because she wanted to know where we lived. What's so important? None of the shinobi are able to fly up here. His reasoning did not seem to impress Popo. Plus, she's not from one of the big five. That is irrelevant and you should stop talking. I say such remarks can reveal information when made in front of an enemy agent. It was unnerving to see the jet black figure staring at her with his strangely round eyes. Despite her concerns about Popo's appearance, Fu felt compelled to defend herself, saying, I'm not acting like a shinobi right now. One of my closest friends is Naoki. I was curious to find out more about him, as he stated. See, she says so herself, Naruto said, crossing his arms over his chest, although he was a little taken aback by how solemn Fu appeared. Even though Popo could read people's hearts, he had discovered over the course of his long life that even good-hearted people could commit horrible crimes if they had a strong enough belief. You are too trusting, Naoki. Given your hormones, this girl was likely the perfect person to send. Hey. Naruto seriously did not like the implication that Popo was making. I trust Fu. I have no excuse not to because of her. I'm so despised in my own village. I would never waste one of the few friendships I've managed to make, Fu said, nodding in agreement. Naoki is that important to me, she said, turning to face her friend, who was also staring at her. She gave him a kind smile. All right, I'll give in. Even as he left the two, Popo said, you might show her around, but don't be shocked to find shinobi here in the middle of the night, ready to slit your throat. However, if you trust her so much, Naoki, perhaps you should tell her your true name. When she slapped him across the face, Fu's expression changed, and Naruto honestly couldn't blame her. 1 week prior to the Tenkaichi Budokai, Konoha. The following morning, Shikamaru woke up in the hospital, opened his eyes, and immediately closed them. The room was brighter than he was accustomed to, with the dull colors failing to lessen the brightness of the morning sun streaming in through the window, and there was someone standing at the foot of his bed, someone he detested right then. You appear to be awake, the voice that plagued his days for what seemed like an eternity said. Don't fake it. The Nara moaned pitifully, refusing to open his eyes. I lost, can't you just leave me alone? Jiraiya took a seat by his bedside and said, I could, but what can I say? You're an interesting kid. You remind me of someone I knew when I was younger, Jiraiya said. Shikamaru, who was a history buff and was apparently being compared to Orochimaru of the Sannin, shrank into his hospital bed. Oh, so you know the story? He was my teammate, and for a while there, before he betrayed us all, he was my friend. All right, so I won't need to provide the background information. Orochimaru and you both had an almost supernatural intelligence. Sincerely, child. Have you looked at your IQ test results? Obviously, I have. Shikamaru shook his head, saying, there are different ways of thinking and it would be naive to think that mine is the correct way. Those tests do indicate something, but they aren't as accurate as everyone seems to think. Well, that response right there demonstrates how you two differ from one another. You only apply your intelligence to safeguard your comfort level. Shikamaru grimly nodded, though it wasn't as if he hadn't noticed Jiraiya's manipulations. The man was just too cunning and strong to get anything past. Whether you realize it or not, despite your smarts, you are predictable because you're lazy. The other side of that outlook on life is a positive one. You will live a long life because you don't have many goals in life, and I'm willing to wager that you'll be happier than most people. Orochimaru had a lot of desires. His intentions were visible even as children. Just beneath the surface of his eyes he desired nothing less than the entire world. Shikamaru felt as though he was privy to something straight out of a textbook and could only watch in awe as Jiraiya hung his head, long white hair falling to cover his face. He wanted to know everything and do everything, to go to any lengths in his pursuit of it all. What I'm trying to say is that you're a good child. The man preferred to pretend to be a normal pervert, but Jiraiya's ability to exert pressure even in casual conversation was so great that Shikamaru could barely breathe. I know now that you can see that power is a means to shaping your own life, Jiraiya said, staring into his eyes. I know that I was rough on you, but I did that because that is what you needed, when you needed it, Shikamaru. The only way to safeguard your interests in this world is to fight for them. Never forget that, and avoid falling prey to passivity. A good man who does nothing in the face of injustice is the ultimate tragedy. He found that statement to be extremely meaningful. Shikamaru nodded his head and muttered, yes, of course. The Toad Sage instantly returned to his typical smile. Atta, boy, he said, patting Shikamaru on the shoulder as he was leaving. He turned back to say, see you in 5 days when we leave for the tournament. As expected, there was a groan from behind him when he closed the door, and when he entered the hallway, someone was waiting for him. With a deep bow, Shino said, Shisho, 1, good morning. He smirked and reached behind him, removing an insect from the small of his back before saying, cut the crap. Kid? I see that you're putting the blood muds to good use. Pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose, Shino said, "It would be unwise not to do so." "All right, tell me what has brought you here." Jiraiya remained silent, obviously waiting for Shino to get right to the point. Shino appreciated that Jiraiya didn't mince words, saying, "My father and I both have a query about the exact procedure of the upcoming tournament. I intended to speak with both you and Shikamaru at some point today. It only seemed logical to do so while you were in the same location. Why are Shikamaru and I being asked to go to Gate no Kuni as well, if Sasuke is the necessary combatant?" Gazing into the mysterious darkness behind Shino's shaded glasses, Jiraiya responded bluntly, "Redundancy. It's unfair that you young ones are involved in something like this, but this operation holds the highest of stakes not only for Konoha but for the entire world." He said it should be safe to discuss since it has been declassified and the secret has been known for years. The fact is that training just one boy would be too dangerous, so we needed 3 boys who could compete against Naruto in the tournament. Despite his reputation for being gentle with children, the Sandaime has been regretting his use of genin ever since he was forced to do so during significant Third Shinobi War battles. I assure you that the world would already be at war if it weren't for the stringent regulations this Piccolo guy established for the competition. That is the one thing for which I am grateful to him. What are you saying? Our intelligence indicates that Piccolo visited every village prior to announcing the tournament and demonstrated his strength to the local cage. Then he presented them with an artifact that was incredibly powerful. Though it is still classified, every country is attempting to collect all of the artifacts in one go, with the remaining fragments serving as the tournament's prize. I have already been informed of this by my father. All right, he said, nodding, so you're aware of the stakes. The only reason for the current state of peace is that the artifacts have not been activated. The only way to make sure they are activated is to abide by the agreement to keep the peace until the tournament day. Now I understand. In fact, Shino's role was evident after the facts were presented to him. Yes, you do. You can see that all bets are off as soon as the tournament starts. Even with the 20 guards we were permitted, we cannot be certain that the other factions won't try to murder you once the artifacts are operational. In summary, Shino said, redundancy. Jiraiya put a hand on Shino's shoulder and said, in this world, you have to at least be sure that you fight on the side of good. There was a tense moment when Jiraiya could sense that Shino had lost faith in some way. Even though Konoha is far from flawless, we are not the bad guys in this situation. Who is it? Without immediately responding, Jiraiya turned away from the Aburame clan member and said, that's something I ask myself all the time. Rest while you can, you'll need it when the time comes. Uchiha District, Konoha. Sakura Haruno showed up at Sasuke's door that morning, looking much nicer than usual in a white sundress and matching shoes, of course. Her bright pink hair pulled up in a bun with loose strands hanging down to frame her face, and she grinned and said, good morning, Sasuke-kun. Yes, good morning. What are you looking for? Sasuke folded his arms across his chest and leaned against the doorframe. Well, I know it was announced the other day that you were going to fight in a tournament. Sakura said, not deterred by his reticent reply, opening her hands behind her back to reveal a small charm made of red cloth that was meticulously threaded with white thread in a pattern of cherry blossoms that fell around the kanji embroidered in the center. I got you this for good luck next week. She trailed off because Sasuke was giving her a more intense than normal glare. I was worried for you when I heard that you would be involved in this Tenkaichi Budokai thing, she said. Do you think that I want this Omamori, too? He asked, taking the charm from her hands and giving it a critical examination. And if there is any doubt, I will assure you of one thing, he said, holding the 2 pieces of red cloth out in front of him and letting them join the prayers beneath his feet. As if there is anything as foolish and stupid as the notion of gods. Sasuke tore open the charm. Letting the prayers inside fall to the ground, he casually churned a heel into the paper strips while wearing a look of complete contempt. Don't pray for me. Please, I reject that foolish charm you gave me, and I reject your prayers. I will personally track down and destroy any gods that control our destiny, down to the very last divine fucking bone. Sakura was crying when the door slammed shut, and she stood there for a few minutes feeling worthless, stupid, and foolish. Although she was accustomed to Sasuke rejecting her, he had never treated her cruelly before. So all she could do was cast a regretful glance down at the defiled remnants of her charm and shuffle away, sobbing softly. In the meantime, Sasuke had returned to his daily routine of cleaning the family dojo, which he usually did early in the morning before training started. He would carefully go over every inch of the room, removing any dirt or dust that might contaminate it. Out of pride, Sasuke kept up with every area of Uchiha land by himself. When Sasuke wasn't training, he was probably somewhere in the abandoned compound, cleaning the walls, watching a speck of dust fall to the floor, and he attacked it fiercely. It was his silent homage to his family's legacy and his pledge that one day the Uchiha district would flourish again. The naivete behind such an action was intolerable. He had not worked so hard just to suddenly rely on the gods, if such things even existed. Life had taught him that the gods were either dead, fake, or malevolent objectively. He knew that Sakura had only good intentions when she presented him with that useless charm, but he still felt bad about what he had said to her. Shit. He quickly went to clean up after realizing that those prayers were most likely still lying where he had left Sakura. On the lookout. You ought to be training. Why are you still sulking? After training today, I need to consider getting in touch with Fu once more since he and Fu's falling out. Naruto had become less active. She was upset that he was keeping secrets, and he reacted badly because he didn't understand how important his name was despite his stubbornness. He made an effort to make amends with the girl and offered more information, but she was upset and requested to be taken home. Piccolo was unprepared for this kind of situation. His only experience with it was when Gohan fell in love with Vital and didn't know how to handle it. Fortunately for the young Demi-Saiyan, Vital was quite assertive on her own and made sure he understood her intentions. Similarly, Goku was picked by Chi-Chi very early on and never had to deal with any kind of relationship uncertainty. He realized, much to his own dismay, that humans must have this innate difficulty dealing with the other gender and that Naruto would probably need some guidance to get out of this funk. If only Popo hadn't become such a downer, he would be more equipped to handle this sort of thing as a Namekian. The entire human courting system seemed strange. Why all the differentiation between the two genders? It all seemed pointless when one could create children at any time, asexually. Piccolo asked, "Do you want to?" With a look like he had just swallowed a bitter pill. Discuss it? After a brief moment of seeming hesitancy, Naruto nodded and said, "Yes, I simply don't understand the significance of this. It's not like I didn't behave normally around her. I brought her up here and everything. I simply got used to being Naoki in the real world, so I didn't really mean to hide it. Nothing was there to hide it." "Yeah, I see what you mean." Piccolo agreed with his student that Naruto had some extenuating circumstances that applied to him, and perhaps the girl, Fu, would have reacted differently if she had been more mature. However, based on his understanding of the human psyche, he realized that maturity was a difficult thing to develop within a human mind. They were far too emotional, with not enough rationality to make up for the gut feelings and instinctual reactions that carried them away, all too frequently to their own detriment. In addition, Popo had told him that Fu's situation in her village was similar to Naruto's in Konoha. "What are you saying?" Looking at it from her point of view, "I don't understand why she's so upset." "Maybe you are, but I urge you to investigate further. What are your knowledge of Fu?" "Well, she shares many similarities with me. She claims that I was her best friend and that no one in her village truly likes her." Naruto stated this factually. "How did she feel, in your opinion, when she discovered that the one person she trusted as a friend was hiding secrets from her?" "But I told her pretty much everything that I was allowed to tell people," said Naruto, throwing up his hands in frustration. "I was definitely not supposed to take her to the lookout, but I did. I would have told her everything if she had waited, but she refused to listen." "But you're still not looking at it from her perspective," Piccolo said. "Acknowledging the issue, she must be aware of the stakes involved for you. You suppose she is aware that Popo and I are pressuring you to keep your distance from the outside world? You know, she can't possibly comprehend all of that. Given that, it's possible that she believed you didn't trust her enough or that you didn't value her as much as you did." There was a problem with this line of thought, though. "But I know I wouldn't cut a friend out of my life for something like this. What if the Sandaime had been keeping a secret from him and he eventually figured it out? What if Piccolo or Popo had decided not to keep him informed of pressing matters? Wouldn't he also become angry or at the very least frustrated with them as a result? She pretended that she never wanted to see me again, but I might be angry for a while. And this, I believe, is where the distinction between men and women comes in." Piccolo sighed. "Such things are far more important to women than to men. They are more sentimental and probably have a completely different perspective than either of us. Although Namekians do not have genders, our thoughts and behaviors are unquestionably more like those of male humans." Clearly dissatisfied, the blonde boy who was staring up at him shook his head. "How does that help me? It doesn't imply that Fu will no longer be upset with me." Piccolo said, "Look, I know you like this girl, or whatever. Don't try to deny it. You wouldn't be so torn up about this if you didn't like her. I understand how important these things are to your species. However, the point is that you shouldn't be overly bothered by it. You chose to become friends with Fu, so I know she's a good girl." Naruto nodded. As a child, he had always been able to predict people's intentions and had relied on his intuition to steer clear of many dangerous situations. "So, tell me, how much do you believe in Fu? Do you have faith that she will change her mind and realize that you meant nothing by it? Do you not believe that she is deserving of a second chance?" It seemed as though a switch had been flipped. "You're right, I've been undervaluing her. I'm confident that she wouldn't simply end a friendship over something so foolish. She's just upset right now. I suppose it takes girls longer than boys to move on from things. Sounds about right. Many thanks, Piccolo. The Namekian was very uneasy, so Naruto hurried in and gave him a hug. I'm going to go work on my katas. Work on modifying the Kyuubi's remaining chakra. That's the best thing you can do for now in order to improve for the tournament, Piccolo commanded, covering Naruto's head with a pat that was a little more forceful than usual. Using that stuff really hurts, Naruto said with a disgusting expression. The barrier you and Popo created is helpful, but I find it difficult to let go of it before it overwhelms me. The way it makes me feel bothers me. I know what you mean, but it's undeniably a potent weapon. All I'm saying is don't be afraid to use it if you ever need to. Having access to it when you need it would be preferable to being in a predicament where it could have saved your life. Naruto reluctantly said, okay, just don't expect anything soon. I can hardly separate my own chakra into Ki and Kai, much less the chakra of the Kyuubi. Simply don't give up. It will get easier the more you try. Piccolo was left with his own thoughts after Naruto bolted off to train, and a faint sense of exhaustion began to seep into his bones. Why had he been feeling so disoriented lately? To Kigakure, 3 days prior to Tenkaichi Budokai. The meeting started late in the day, and the other Chunin from her village were gathered in neat lines, a small group in comparison to one of the larger villages, but they were all completely committed to Kigakure and would defend it to the death. Even though he still appeared youthful and inexperienced when compared to some of the other ninja, Shibuki had a certain leadership quality that everyone admired. The few Junin that Taki had left stood close to him. While some were undoubtedly more experienced than Shibuki, they all respected him and the legacy his father had left behind. We have finally received information about global events from our sources. Although every major village has made every effort to maintain silence, significant events are taking place outside. You may have heard rumors of a military build-up from all 5 of the major powers, Shibuki said firmly, instantly putting an end to any remaining conversation or murmuring among the gathered shinobi. The entire balance of the world is hanging on the precipice of war. Kigakure bordered Gake no Kuni, and an increase in troops along the country's border was typically a sign of an impending invasion. It appears as though Konohagakure, village hidden in leaves, has begun to amass a large number of their forces at their northern border with Gake no Kuni, land of cliffs. 3. Additionally, Iwagakure, village hidden in stone, had long petitioned us for access to Gake no Kuni through our western border. They have been relentless in their demands, but they have kept quiet about the reason we were forced to give them permission to cross our territory. Reports have come in from sources in Omegakure, village hidden in rain, that there have been increased patrols from Sanagakure, village hidden in sand, and a large number of shinobi crossing the border into Hai no Kuni, the land of fire. Shibuki approached the map that was hanging on the wall behind him and attached a couple markers of troop movements. One heading north from Konoha and one heading east from Iwagakure. He attached a longer marker that extended from Suna in the southwest up through Hai no Kuni towards Gake no Kuni. We can assume that they are using Hai no Kuni to gain access to Gake no Kuni because of their alliance with Konoha. Another marker appeared on the map, followed by another heading west from Kumogakure, village hidden in clouds. Based on the disputes Yugakure, village hidden in hot water, has had with Kumo, we can also assume that their forces are also aiming for Gake no Kuni. The rest is inference, but we can assume that Kirigakure, village hidden in mist, is moving forces through Shimo no Kuni, land of frost, and are headed towards Gake no Kuni. Everyone in the room was tense, and now that Shibuki had stopped talking, there were a few worried murmurs in the crowd. Fu herself knew that this could not be good. It seemed like a war would be breaking out in Gake no Kuni. A Chunin standing a few rows ahead of her and to her right said, "What can all of this mean?" "This scroll came to us at a great cost," their leader said, gesturing to one of the Junin by his side. The somber-looking man took a scroll out of his pocket and placed it in Shibuki's hands. He unfolded the scroll and read its contents for a few minutes before he sighed. "I still can't believe it, even though it's right here in black and white. I don't want to go into too much detail, but there were many bribes that had to be made in order to receive this information. You're all familiar with the Dragon Ball legends, right?" Fu's training as a shinobi began after the general assent was given around the room. Fu had only heard this story from one of the caretakers she could hardly recall from her early years. She was a good-hearted old woman who passed away when Fu was 4 years old. The legend was about 7 orbs that, when gathered, would summon a great dragon that would grant any wish. It seemed that there was a monkey god who would protect the balls for all eternity. All right, so I don't need to explain. It appears that everyone on the planet is certain that the Dragon Balls exist. A strange creature, as some refer to him as an alien, while others have noted his resemblance to the Demon King mentioned in a few ancient documents, came to the villages and issued a challenge to compete. I personally think it's all rubbish, but every major power in the world has been convinced, so there must be some merit to this tale, Shibuki said, displaying his skepticism toward the entire story. Whoever can best the being, or its apprentice, will receive the Dragon Balls as well as their one wish. What are our options? What would happen if one of the tournament's winners wanted to rule the entire world? How could they fall for such a thing? You ought to honor the old tales. The other nations have been too silent in recent years, so I knew something was going on. Shibuki-sama. What ought to be done? The shinobi immediately fell silent when Shibuki gave them a menacing look. At this time, there is nothing that can be done. We can only hope that this Piccolo person keeps the Dragon Balls, or that whoever wins is kind to us, because we haven't been invited to this tournament. He observed the dejected expressions on his people's faces, but he added, but we won't sit around waiting to die. The world will undoubtedly change after this tournament, regardless of the outcome. We need to get ready for both war and peace. We must be prepared for any eventuality. All but one of the shinobi joined in the declaration of their faith in Shibuki and Takigakure as they cried out to their leader as one, suddenly engulfed in the flames of patriotism. Shibuki had called the alien who arranged the tournament Piccolo, the name of Naruto's teacher. Naruto must be this apprentice that he had mentioned. Fu was far too preoccupied trying to piece things together. Fu's thoughts were completely elsewhere even as Shibuki started to lay out plans for strengthening the village's defense and stepping up patrols to make sure they stayed hidden. If Naruto was competing in this high-stakes tournament, where the world's fate literally depended on the outcome, then he was in grave danger. Though she wished they would stop, she couldn't help but imagine Naruto being massacred by faceless, nameless shinobi from the major villages. Was that why he had been so reclusive? Was he afraid for his life? All of a sudden, she felt guilty. Midnight, Central Gate no Kuni. 9 figures in matching black cloaks with red clouds on them stood on a plain stone platform that appeared to be a crude fighting arena, 6-sided with big pillars at the points. 4. The arena was covered in boring gray tiles that were rough and generally unattractive. The figure in front of them spoke to another figure floating high above them in the moonlight's darkness, saying, "The 5-seal barrier is in place. All right, I expect everyone to fulfill their end of the agreement now that the preparations are finished. But, naturally, we would never consider passing up such a chance." The leader spoke. His eyes glowed purple, the ripple-like concentric circles inside appearing to shimmer with barely contained power. So many Jinchuriki gathered in one place. The energy had been siphoned off by the modified barrier that had been attached to Naruto's seal, and Piccolo could not help but frown as he took a vial from behind him and said, "As we agreed, a large sample of the Kyuubi's chakra." He threw the vial down to the group leader, who skillfully caught it. Piccolo simply nodded, saying, "When the time comes, I look forward to killing you and ending this farce once and for all." Excellent. The chakra inside the vial throbbed warm against his hand, the red glow visible through the spaces between his fingers. "We will do as you ask, and make sure that the hidden villages do not move the rest of their forces into Gate no Kuni, at least while the tournament is still going. Better men than you have tried." The Namekian grinned. "Here you'll discover that I don't give up easily." The Akatsuki blurred away in various directions after saying, "Let's hope not." In the interim, outside Takigakure, the whole situation they found themselves in was quite surreal. Magic balls that could grant any wish? It seemed like the stuff of fairy tales. But now they were all dealing with the very real consequences of such things. Fu finally succeeded in escaping the village, a feat made even more difficult by the fact that everyone was on high alert. They had sparred a few times, and each time it had felt like Naruto, or Naoki as she had known him back then, was playing around with her, barely breaking a sweat as he swatted aside all her best moves. Perhaps she had been overanalyzing things, but surely Naruto, the sweet boy who loved nothing more than to laugh and joke around, was not going to be pitted against the best the other villages had to offer. The spars had never escalated beyond taijutsu, which was not her strong suit, but there was no doubt that he was a formidable opponent. Fu knew that every relationship was like a lifeline, and she could only imagine how bothered he must have been when she freaked out the way she did. She searched her mind for another explanation, but the information she had seemed to be giving her led her to believe that her best friend in the world would soon be fighting for his life, and she had treated him so poorly these past few days. Now, all she could do was hope that he would listen to her and forgive her. She threw herself into a furious training session because she was desperate to see him as soon as possible. She shot around their usual meeting spot, hitting any tree that would stand in her way and toppling a couple due to the stress she was under. The Nanabi's chakra was starting to affect her body, which increased her strength. Soon, her clothes were clinging to her from the moisture. It wasn't often that she cut loose like this. "Why are you so agitated?" With a sigh of relief, Fu said, "Naruto, I'm so sorry." Naruto was sitting on a tree branch high above her, and she stopped moving violently as the poisonous chakra of her biju started to fade and return to her body. What are you sorry about? I know I hurt you by breaking your trust. I'm the one who should be sorry, he said, pushing himself off the sturdy branch he was sitting on and floating down towards her. You did, but I shouldn't have reacted the way I did, Fu said, acknowledging that the knowledge that he didn't trust her enough to reveal his true name had pierced her heart like a knife. I now understand why you withheld some information from me. And you would have given me an explanation if I had listened to you as you requested. I'm simply dissatisfied with myself. He put a comforting hand on her shoulder as he stood on the ground in front of her and said, It's okay, hee. Simply put, I'm happy we're communicating once more. That grin she had grown so accustomed to made its way across his face. She was tempted to smile along with him. His attitudes were always infectious, but try as she might, she could not stop the sadness that she felt from manifesting itself. Naruto was puzzled by her reaction and peered into her orange eyes. What's the matter? This should be joyful because we are reconciling. She threw herself at him with unanticipated force, putting her arms around him in a tight hug. Naruto stood frozen for a moment, then relaxed into the embrace. Even as she trembled against him and tried not to cry at last, he put his arms around her and asked in the softest voice he could manage, Fu, what's the matter? This kind of behavior was out of character for her. Baka, I am aware of the competition in a few days. The one, how can you be so at ease when you will be facing the greatest shinobi the world has to offer? She leaned back so she could look at him, removing her face from where it rested in the crook of his neck. What if you die? This is being taken very seriously by the entire world. If things go wrong, war will break out, and they'll do whatever it takes to obtain those foolish Dragon Balls, you know. Naruto simply laughed and drew her in, saying, Believe me, I won't be defeated easily. As you can see, I will be standing atop a heap of beaten-up ninjas from all over the world. When this is all over, I won't let anything stop me. His assurance nearly reassured Fu, but she quickly pushed herself away from him. You can't just say that, despite your strength, everyone is against you. And I'll let them all know exactly who they're up against. In addition, I will only be competing against individuals my own age. Piccolo has all the elderly people. Her eyes brightened. What? Really? Nothing like that was mentioned by Shibuki. Piccolo likes to test my limits, but he knows that even I can't compete with people who have a lot more experience than I do, let alone for 5 straight matches, Naruto remarked. That's still no good, Naruto, she said, looking down at the ground as she thought deeply. We should just leave. The words came out of her mouth slowly, as if they were ground out of her. This news made her feel a little better, but she was still plagued by a sense of dread that had been with her since learning about the foolish tournament. What? Her orange eyes were staring intently into his blue ones as she spoke with passion now. You heard me. Let's just leave this whole thing behind. My village is nothing to me, so I don't care about it. Nobody is there to support me. It wasn't until I learned about the tournament that I realized. But Naruto? She began to approach him once more. Naruto was almost taken aback as she leaned forward and... Don't worry, Fu, Naruto said, smiling and meeting her halfway with his forehead against hers. There's no way I could let anything happen to Maya, not while you're here waiting for me. He recalled a manga he had read as a child, in which the protagonist encountered a similar circumstance to the one he was in now. He reached up and, on impulse, gently grabbed the red hairclip she was wearing and removed it, causing a tiny fringe of mint green hair to fall down to cover part of her face. She looked at him in confusion. Naruto grabbed the clip and fastened it to his gi's left hand opening, directly over his heart. How can I return your hairclip if I don't return? She was crying uncontrollably now. You big dummy, she said. This way we have something to bring us back together, he said, removing the red sash from around his waist and wrapping it around her neck like a scarf. His only response was a cunning smile. After all, that's my favorite sash, so you had better keep it clean. It won't be long before I come for it. Naruto. She dove at him once again, burying her head in his chest, which was now more exposed now that the sash had been removed. He fell to his butt with a thud. Promise me you'll come back. It's a promise, Naruto said, grinning down at her as she sat between his legs and gazed up at him with large, tearful eyes. Going back on my word is something I will never do. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, and I promise that we will reunite before you even notice my absence. She put her worries aside for the time being and made an effort to enjoy being near Naruto. A slight blush appeared on her face as she became aware of their situation, but she brutally suppressed it and held him even closer. She wouldn't allow embarrassment to ruin a moment like this, especially since it might be her last encounter with him. You better keep your promise. I'll kill you myself if you don't. He chuckled and said, It's a deal. Piccolo, sitting in a shallow pool of water, trying to absorb sunlight, had been feeling ill ever since the parasite incident. At first, he was fine and happy to have gotten rid of the nasty thing, but as time went on, he began to feel less and less. He would frequently feel groggy for no apparent reason and his movements would become sluggish despite hours of meditation and introspection. He was unable to identify any problems with himself. He looked at the Dragon Ball he had carried with him since the beginning, and his thoughts turned to Dend, who had made this set of balls in the first place. Today was the day of the tournament. He had made an error, which at the time seemed like a sensible solution, but there had been something pushing his thoughts toward extremity during his time with the parasite. If only Dend had been there for him, maybe things would have worked out better. He passed away just when he needed the most direction. Piccolo's eyes suddenly widened. What? So, Sasuke and Shikamaru are off fighting in that tournament today. Don't forget about Shino as well, said a solemn voice. Ino pulled a silly face and said, right, can't forget about Buggy. Sadly, her friend's expression was devoid of any amusement. It's going to be okay, Sakura, Ino said. I have no doubt that Shino, Sasuke, and even Shikamaru will return without incident. You don't understand, Ino. This is a serious matter. There is a magic object that we are all fighting over, and all the villages are involved. Sasuke might be slain. The Yamanaka girl could not help but say, no, it's you who doesn't get it, even though she was well aware of this fact and did not like to be reminded of it. People in Konoha put their lives in danger every day for the village. Perhaps because you don't have any ninja in your family. When my father goes on a mission, do you think I enjoy saying goodbye to him? That's not how I meant it. Why must Sasuke, Shikamaru, and Shino become involved when your dad is a Junin and they are merely children like us? Ino's only response to this was, I guess, sometimes the village comes first. The Iwa Nin were the first to arrive. There were 24 of them, and they arrived shortly after sunrise with their earth-colored vests and red undergarments. They appeared to be a formidable force as they lined up on their assigned side of the plain arena. 2 boulders, a simple wooden post in their section, bore the symbol for their village. Only a few minutes later, the Kumo ninja arrived directly beside them, and they formed a neat line in front of their post, with the Raikage at the head of the group, looking over at the Iwa forces, specifically Itoki, and giving a reluctant nod of respect that was reciprocated by the diminutive Kage. There was a tense silence among the gathered shinobi, with only 2 areas surrounding the hexagonal arena empty as the forces from Konoha replaced the Iwa Nin directly across from them, followed almost immediately by the shinobi from Suna. There was complete silence as the ninja groups stared at one another. The Kiri Nin filled one of the final spaces between the Konoha Nin and the Kumo Nin. At last, all the major forces had gathered. Tension was in the air. Hands were on weapons. Eyes were darting around, assessing the competition. The cages turned to face one another. Sarutobi moved forward, approaching the arena. From Kumo was the first of the other cages to follow suit, followed by Yagura and Kei's cage. Onoki was the last to move closer, remaining farther away from the others. Sarutobi put on his best neutral face and said, I wish we had gathered together in this way under more auspicious circumstances. I'm sure you do, said A. As with you tree huggers, hiding in your leaves, you simply don't want to engage any of my shinobi in combat. With the bitterness of old age, Onoki said, HMPH, if I had it my way, we would have already killed you all and made off with these Dragon Balls, but there's not much to be done in these circumstances. The Hokage said lightly, as direct as always. Onoki, good to see that old age has not calmed your disposition. The Tsuchikage replied, bite me. There is no justification for conflict. Gentleman with a voice as harsh and dry as the desert, the Keiskage said, there will be plenty of time for that later. Yagura didn't say anything, staring into his colleague's hollow eyes. You are absolutely correct, Keiskage Dono. There is no justification for behaving like a barbarians. With an open hand toward the center of the arena, Sarutobi thought, this is a great chance to show off our best ninja to each other regardless of the result. We should see this as a demonstration of peace. Onoki literally spat in the Hokage's direction, saying, you know damn well that much blood will be shed here on this day. He folded his well-muscled arms across his wide, dark-skinned chest and said, that's right, old man, Kumo has not forgotten our previous struggles against one another. I'm taking any opportunity to knock your head off. Let's see how well my lariat is handled by that elderly neck. Not to be intimidated, Sarutobi smiled and said, we shall see if you get the chance. I'll tear you to pieces, bastard monkey, if he doesn't. Konoha's crimes and constant taunts at us are still fresh in my mind. Your shinobi's death threats drove him out even after he sent an emissary to your village. Do not underestimate the forces of the earth, Onoki said, his large nostrils flaring and chakra gushing from him in a visible aura. A member of one of our noble houses, nearly detained by you rats, for a crime we did not perpetrate. The very ground you walk on might be eroding beneath you. And those ninja we killed, well, they had no business skulking around my village anyway. Sarutobi grinned at the elder Cage, adding, that particular incident was the result of an unfortunate coincidence. I assure you, burning them out of hiding was absolutely necessary. You're a bitch, son. Onoki was about to launch an attack when someone unexpectedly showed up. The Akatsuki were the last force in this tournament, and each cage knew what those robes meant, so they all jumped away from the arena when they saw the two figures, who appeared at the last available side of the hexagon, wearing black cloaks with red clouds on them, their faces covered by wide-brimmed hats. A new group appeared out of nowhere, high above the arena, as if they had been waiting for the Akatsuki to arrive nearly simultaneously. The taller Akatsuki member made a hand seal and said in a deep voice, 7 seal barrier. The second Akatsuki member activated another set of seals, which encircled the forces on all sides and kept them apart from each other. The ring was encased at the top and surrounded on all sides by a deep purple, translucent layer of chakra. What is this supposed to mean? Onoki yelled at the 3 individuals standing far above them, one of whom was clearly Piccolo. Before the Tenkaichi Budokai begins, we can't have you all tearing each other to pieces, can we? Piccolo seemed quite pleased with himself as he smiled down at them. When Naruto leaned over the edge of the carpet they were all standing on and waved down at him, shouting, "Hey, Gigi." Sarutobi clearly approved of this development and nodded up towards Piccolo. It was a small gesture of approval, but to the other cages it seemed like something more. It is nice to see you in good spirits, Naruto-kun. Sarutobi almost slapped his face, but he kept his cool and said, I feared that you would be changed after being abducted from our village by those brutes beside you. He understood that Naruto had put him in a difficult situation, and he attempted to explain it to the others without being direct. No, Popo and Piccolo are doing fine. I kind of wish I didn't have to compete in this pointless competition, but whatever Piccolo's directives. Sorry about leaving the village, but I didn't exactly have a choice at the time, Naruto said, giving his oldest confidant a sheepish smile and massaging the back of his neck. I'm sure you were concerned. Sarutobi said, just loud enough to be heard, you don't know the half of it, Naruto. It was nice to see him again, but he now seriously questioned Naruto's intentions. He had clearly not been forced to fight alongside the alien, and he appeared to be happier than ever. Thanked Kami for small blessings. Naruto had not been corrupted. The black creature next to him leaned over and whispered in his ear, causing Naruto to instantly make a face. He had no idea that emphasizing his ties to Konoha could cause problems for his home village. Popo had advised him to keep his mouth shut, but with Sarutobi standing right in front of him, it was difficult to remain silent. However, the spark had already ignited. I see now, it all makes sense. Are you idiots from Konoha involved? Did you really believe that you would trick us into falling into this trap and eliminating the competition all at once? It is good that I kept forces in reserve for just this occasion. Onoki yelled, his accusations echoing throughout the open space they were in. You honorless assassins all have forces lurking somewhere nearby, just waiting to betray one another, like you were born to do so, Piccolo said as he started to float down towards the arena, causing a tiny hole to open in the barrier above the ring. The Namekian landed in the center of the arena. However, you will find your forces delayed, all of you. No matter what signal you give will find that those ninja you poised ready to spring on each other will not be making an appearance on this day. The members of the Akatsuki have made sure of that. Despite the barrier separating them, Onoki cursed, and the Raikage was so furious that he appeared just in time to throw himself at Piccolo. You mean to say that you've attacked our shinobi with the help of the worst sort of criminals? We should join forces and crush you now where you stand. My men are under strict orders to delay any advancing shinobi using any means necessary until you create the reason for retaliation. They will not engage your ninja, said the taller of the two Akatsuki members. Did you know of this? The bristling Cage asked Sarutobi. Sarutobi attempted to reassure the unimpressed man. If I did, I would have informed you, allies as we are. You are the first one I go after this barrier falls, growled at Sarutobi, slapping a hand to his chest. Onoki glanced at it and said, I see we are in agreement, Raikage Dono. A nodded in response. Beside Yagura, the Mizukage, a hooded shinobi bent down and spoke to the Jinchuriki. Let's begin already. All of the theatrics and posturing is becoming tiresome, he said, nodding before finally letting his monotone voice be heard. Piccolo declared from the center ring, indeed, your empty threats are nothing. If need be I will strike you all down before you can do so. Before beginning the battle, we must decide the order of events. The junior division of battles will take place before we adults can get to ripping each other's throats out. Then let's get on with it, exclaimed Onoki said, yes, let's. The Cage's contribution was, finally, enough waiting around. Finally, Sarutobi added, if we must, first, we play a good old-fashioned game of Jan-Ken Pon to decide which country has the first shot at Naruto. Piccolo laughed. A game of rock, paper, scissors was definitely not what the gathered shinobi were anticipating. Who will represent each village in this game of odds? Onoki cried out, "Bah! What foolishness!" But he still held up a fist despite being discouraged as well. The other cages volunteered to represent their villages in this crucial Jan-Ken-Pon game. Heaven's once immaculate terrain had been ripped apart. The perfect gardens and grassy fields were smeared with blood of all shades instead of the massive wave that initiated the invasion. A gaping swirling vortex into HFIL had been present in the sky for a full week, with trickles of mutated cell JRs arriving. The grounds were covered in bodies of all kinds, which gave everything the gloomy appearance of combat. Structures were completely destroyed, and pieces of debris could be seen everywhere. Only terrifying visions of chaos and devastation remained, along with any trace of the once tranquil existence of those who lived there. Goku had finally made it to this scene. Up until now, he had been preoccupied with his battle with Beerus. The god of destruction was just too focused to let a good fight end and had denied Goku the opportunity to assist where he was needed. Goku was only able to escape after persuading Beerus that many good warriors would perish if he did not step in. Reluctantly, the jackal-like god released him and promised not to destroy too many planets while he was away. Goku's ancient, moral rage began to seep into his stomach. Carnage like this was intolerable. This kind of mass slaughter was abhorrent. As soon as he transformed back into a Super Saiyan god, he started to emit a red aura. He started to fly over the ravaged territory, his anger growing with every second that went by and every skilled fighter that was laid to waste unwillingly. He ascended even higher into his ascended Super Saiyan god form, his orange-tinted hair pushed upward by his immense strength. By using his senses, he discovered a battle going on nearby, with a very familiar fighter at its center. Krillin was there, obviously near death. He was surrounded by a number of the monsters that had destroyed the universe's only real paradise cells. Filthy fox-like incarnations, which resembled something from a nightmare, were slowly dissecting his best friend. Krillin was covered in so much blood that it was difficult to see the details of his face or clothes, and one of his arms was bent abnormally. He attempted in vain to fight on, his dark hair matted to his scalp around him. The small animals were gleefully switching between snarling and attacking the injured fighter. Goku had come upon them. Krillin was about to blink when the cell JRs, the people who had been attacking him, were gone in front of his eyes. It literally vanished. The man in front of him had not shown any signs of movement or a key blast, just speed and heart-stopping, gut-wrenching power. There was silence for a while. "Gee, Goku," Krillin managed to say before collapsing into a heap with a tear streaming down his cheek. The fabled Saiyan held his friend in his arms. Goku was sure there would be hell to pay for this. From inside the ring, Piccolo exclaimed, "There we have it. Will all combatants please step forward and state your name and village, in the order in which you will be fighting?" Sanagakure, who had won the first round of Jan-Ken-Pon, was the center of attention. A young, brightly red-haired shinobi emerged from their ranks. His eyes were heavily ringed in black, probably from lack of sleep, and he had a lifeless expression. He was dressed in black, with a white sash fastened to a huge gourd that hung over his back. Sabaku no Gara, representing Sanagakure. Kumogakure was the next to come forward. She had pale red hair and dark skin, which was typical in her village. She folded her arms across her chest and gave Piccolo a fierce look. "I'm Karui, from Kumo. You all best remember the name." The dark-haired girl who had been standing close to Onoki the entire time said, "Kuretsuchi, of Iwagakure." She appeared to be very proud to be speaking on behalf of her village. She took out a kunai and looked up at Naruto angrily as she pretended to draw it over her own neck. The blonde target in question could only scowl back at her when she said, "For the sake of my home, I swear to kill you on this day." Sarutobi turned to face the Uchiha clan Saiyan, who nodded and moved forward. Uchiha Sasuke, representative of Konohagakure. He kept his head aimed straight ahead and his coal-black eyes fixed on Piccolo, not even bothering to glance up at Naruto. Naruto was on the verge of hurling himself at the stoic Uchiha from the carpet. There was no surprise when the still disguised leader of the Akatsuki said, "The Akatsuki forfeits its rights to participate in this portion of the Tenkaichi Budokai." After all, their side of the arena was devoid of real kids. A very surprising development came from Kirigakure, Yagura, representing Kirigakure. "What?" Kumo roared. "You're a cage. You can't compete in this tournament." As Onoki concurred, "This is an outrage. Surely you must take issue with this, as the organizer of this farcical tournament." The cage asked Piccolo, who appeared unconcerned. He let the more grievances and arguments fall off his back and turned to face Naruto, gesturing for him to come down. "The tournament's rules stipulate that anyone within a year of Naruto's age may participate. This Yagura is within the required age, and therefore may compete." Light on his toes, Naruto leapt off the carpet and landed in the ring. He clapped his hands together, and using some magic, He pulled them apart to reveal a machete with a blue handle and a red sheath. He threw the machete over his back with practiced ease, fastening the string that held it in place over his shoulder. Grinning to himself, he reached down and secured the string to his dark purple GI with Fu's hairpin with a flourish. Naruto withdrew the machete from its sheath and aimed it at the sky. Uzumaki Naruto, representing the reborn Z fighters. He exclaimed as he turned to face each opponent, "Before the day is through, you'll all see who I am. I'll show you all that you can't make me back down or quit." Popo rolled his eyes on the carpet. What a waste of the deference he was expected to show when he entered the arena. However, Piccolo gave his apprentice a firm pat on the head and appeared to be quite pleased with him. Naruto grinned and said, "Couldn't have said it better myself. On that note, let the Tenkaichi Budokai begin." The morning prior to the competition, before Den died, did he do anything to the Dragon Balls? Asked Piccolo. After giving it some thought, Popo responded, he had already deactivated the balls some time before his death. Why? Piccolo glared down at the pale orb in his hand and remarked, "This is not a widely known fact, but the Dragon Balls will disappear about 100 years after the death of their creator." When he heard the news, he was unable to stand, so that means either these balls are fake, or Dend is still alive. "You only bring this up now? Why?" Popo exclaimed, realizing that it was too late to take action. Scowled, "I don't understand it, but it was as though the memory did not exist up until now, like something was blocking it from within me." Gaara was standing across from him, gazing directly into his eyes. The giant gourd on the redhead's back had just been uncorked, and he appeared to be awaiting an answer, not taking the initiative immediately. Naruto glared back at Gaara and sheathed his machete. "Do you have something to say, or are we going to fight?" He crushed the cork in his hand and shook his head. "The only thing for me to ask is whether or not you will be a worthy offering to my mother. Will your blood excite her?" he said, as sand poured out of his fist. "Time out," Naruto said after blinking a few times. He then flew up to Piccolo and asked, "Did you hear what he just said?" Yeah, I did. That's not normal, right? I think you should be paying attention." Wah. Naruto turned around to see a sand spike coming directly at him. He just raised his arms in a weak defense because he was not quick enough to react. His arms were red and raw. After the sharpened sand struck him, he started to sink as more sand poured in from all sides. Just as he thought the attack was coming to an end, Naruto soon vanished into a sand pile. With a fierce smile, Gaara clasped both of his hands together, and the sand reacted by building up into a big ball. Gaara yelled, "Die!" and slammed his hands together. There was a terrible crunching sound, but not the kind that would be made when someone crushes a body. He had been anticipating a spray of sand tinged with the flesh and blood of that brash blonde, but the disturbed Jinchuriki's cold blue eyes were wide open. He discovered the splintered remains of a wooden log when he lifted his sand. In front of the Konoha area of the arena, Naruto asked, "Did I make that look like a replacement technique, old man?" "I couldn't make the technique work the shinobi way, but I think I've got it worked out." Sarutobi pointed at his furious opponent and said, "You're fighting at the moment, you know." Naruto managed to say, "Such a downer," before he was once more covered in sand. Gaara squashed the log before realizing he was holding one this time. He searched for his opponent, but as soon as he saw the blonde, he saw a log aimed directly at his face. Naruto screamed, "Logged!" as the wood he had summoned struck Gaara squarely. "Who wants some?" he exclaimed as he pointed his fingers around the ring like guns, leaving a log in each spot. Some of the logs burned up against the barrier's side, while others fell to the ground pointlessly. Naruto was too preoccupied to notice that Gaara had prevented the log from hitting him with sand. With a severe, insane frown on his face, Gaara raised his hand to strike Naruto, who was hit by multiple spikes and had to fly upward to avoid them. They appeared to emerge from the earth, and Gaara's gourd was overflowing with more. He was only fortunate that the barrier extended upward about 80 feet. Otherwise, the relatively small spaces would be a death trap. Despite the size of the ring, nearly 15 meters on each side, Gaara's gourd continued to spill sand, eventually covering the majority of the ring. Naruto flew around streams of sand that were pursuing him. A barrage of enormous sand arrows shot through the air he had cleared as he landed in a clear spot and flipped away. Two massive sand columns rose to crush Naruto against one another as Gaara raised his hands. The shocked look on his face suggested that he was engrossed in the assault before Naruto appeared in front of him. Sanagakure's Jinchuriki smiled. Naruto used a burst of ki to conjure a few kunai and send them flying towards Gaara, but his automatic defense swiftly swept away his punches. He withdrew to the arena's periphery after the kunai gave him a few seconds. After removing his weighted wristbands, Naruto slipped out of his weighted shoes and threw them over his shoulder, letting them burn away in the barrier. "I see how it is not even using an afterimage is enough right now. Looks like I underestimated you." Then he was beside his opponent, and Gaara was hit in the face by his fist. Gaara felt the blow more intensely than any pain he had ever experienced. Even though he was wearing sand armor, he lifted a hand to his mouth and noticed a strange, coppery taste. His fingers turned red. My blood. You made me bleed my own blood. Naively, Naruto questioned, who else's blood could you bleed? Moot hair. Gaara hunched over and covered his head with his hands. She wants your blood. Am I up against a crazy person? Naruto asked the Sanagakure side. A few people nodded, but he turned away in a moment due to the Kage's frightful aura. Sand was sticking to Gaara's face and arms. He was still stooped, and the ring felt oppressively heavy with chakra that was strikingly similar to his Kyuubi chakra. Naruto yelled, "You're a Jinchuriki too?" Gaara seemed to connect with that statement, and he raised his head. His face was distorted, the whole right side covered in sand. Sand claws developed over his fingertips, and his right arm was crooked and longer than it should have been. You might just be someone who can validate my existence. Will your death finally quiet her? You gotta level with me here. What are you talking about? With difficulty speaking, Gaara said, She needs death. Most can't appease her appetite. He reached out to Naruto with his deformed arm, saying, You're different. She's telling me. He slapped his own head and yelled, It wants you dead. Naruto was caught between wanting to put an end to this tournament and wanting to help Gaara as soon as possible. He could replicate the magic barrier he was using on his own seal, but it would take him at least 5 minutes to get it to function in case he ever needed to forcefully halt the flow of his other chakra source. Piccolo made sure he was aware of it. That didn't seem to be an option, though. With Gaara looming over him like something out of a nightmare, he grabbed his machete and swung it at Gaara as he rushed headlong at the redhead who was charging, while Gaara swung his claws at Naruto, who was hit with a shallow wound across his chest. Some of his sand shifted to deflect the blow after dodging backward and using his momentum to land a falling kick on Gaara. Naruto caught himself on his hands and charged after his adversary. The unexpected blow made Gaara wince, but he was so furious that he just opened his eyes and attempted to find Naruto, who had already managed to right himself in midair. Gaara crashed back down to the tiled ring after Naruto slammed his two fists down on top of his head. Gaara's fall was cushioned by the sand, and more was still flowing from his gourd. In fact, a significant amount of it had dissolved to continue providing the material. Naruto summoned shuriken and sent them down at Gaara because he had run out of options. They quickly burned up into nothing after being deflected easily into the barrier. That was the only way Naruto could get rid of the sand, and his eyes widened. He attacked Gaara once more, this time rushing behind the slower Jinchuriki and tearing the gourd off Gaara's back with a powerful tug. It dissolved right away, producing enough sand to swallow him, but Naruto had anticipated this, and before it could truly begin, he threw the entire gourd at the barrier after encasing it in a shell of conjured iron. Before Gaara could comprehend what had happened, Naruto had returned to his attack and was beating him with a series of powerful punches and kicks. If his sand hadn't interfered, one last kick to the chest would have sent him skidding away and nearly straight into the barrier. You'll regret this, Gaara said, forced sleep technique, while trembling and going through a few hand seals. As he put his machete away, Naruto questioned, He put himself to sleep? Doesn't that mean I win? Sand gathered from everywhere in the ring and swirled around Gaara's lifeless body like a tornado. Gaara's demon must have been summoning it from within its seal because of how much sand was still accumulating around him. When he vanished into the cloud, Gaara gradually assumed the form of a massive sandy tanuki, with a single, enormous tail swinging behind. With his eyes rolled into the back of his head, he appeared at the top of the beast's head. Which of my kin resides within you, Uzumaki Naruto? Now that the demon had fully materialized, Naruto remained silent. He simply let the Kyuubi's energy speak for itself as he dipped into its depths. You have the chakra of the Kyuubi, but his presence is gone. Driven by the overwhelming force of the demonic chakra, Naruto launched himself skyward in the direction of Gaara's sleeping quarters. He had an orange-red ki that was currently enveloping him in an almost translucent aura. A portion of the sand that made up the Ichibi's hand broke off and wrapped around him as it slammed into him from the side. After a brief struggle, he managed to free himself from the sand, but it required using even more of the Kyuubi's chakra. With both hands clenched into fists in front of him, Naruto mustered as much energy as he could, propelled himself to his feet, and launched himself in the direction of Gaara. The path between him and Gaara was blocked by a number of sand barriers that rose in front of him, followed by the Ichibi's tail. Naruto gritted his teeth as he crashed through the first wall of sand, thinking, Not enough. I didn't think that the first match would force me to go this far. He slightly relaxed the barrier on his broken seal. As Naruto breached every barrier erected against him, the only thing visible to those outside the ring were explosions of sand. Naruto stood directly in front of Gaara, his eyes red and slitted, his cheeks marked with darker whiskers. He was holding his machete, which was still sheathed behind his back, and his somewhat long hair had lifted a little. He swung and struck Gaara in the head. The Ichibi's imposing figure fell to the ground as the majority of the sand vanished. Gaara was lying on his back with his head slightly up. Naruto pointed down at Gaara. Still not having put his sheathed machete back in its place behind him, he put it away casually and then remarked, "I hope the next time we meet, I can help you. I can make the Ichibi quiet. The next time you force me to hit you, I'll unsheath this." Wah! Gaara's eyes grew wide. "There's no time now, maybe after the tournament." "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto," came Piccolo's voice from above. As a tiny hole appeared in Suna's side of the barrier, Naruto ascended to the top of the dome close to Piccolo. Gaara, for once, agreed to be dragged away as two of their shinobi approached to retrieve her. After watching the entire match, Shikamaru's gaze remained fixed on Naruto. "Sasuke, how badly do you want to win against him?" he asked. "He's merely another stepping stone on my path. It's not a question of whether or not I will win, it's only how I choose to do so. I may have just seen something very useful." Another man stood beside Jiraiya as he walked up to the two of them and said, "I know what you mean, Shikamaru, go ahead and tell him." He was dressed like a typical Junin, but his long white hair defied gravity by standing upright. It looked like a Sharingan had been inserted into his scarred left eye. Pointing to his own Sharingan, the anonymous Junin asked Sasuke, "Did you see that opening in his stance?" With his hands clenched into fists, Sasuke questioned, "Why do you have that eye?" Sasuke responded, "It was a gift from a dear friend." "Did you see that opening in his stance or not?" Naturally, he had seen the opening with his family's eyes. "Good, make sure you have it memorized. You're going to need every bit of your strength in your fight against him." At last, the Uchiha Saiyan realized the truth of that statement and nodded. "What were you going to say, Shikamaru?" In the interim, HFIL as he ran for his life, his black afro swayed back and forth. "Aw man. I still can't believe I'm down here in HFIL." Hercule's ability to flee was one of his strongest traits. Aside from fighting, everything has gotten much worse since that crazy nine-tailed fox Cell thing took over down here. Cell continued to pose a threat even in the afterlife. The creature that Cell had transformed into suddenly materialized in front of Hercule, who had been hiding in a pleasant little spot in the woods when this monster suddenly appeared. All he could do was cower, shivers running down his spine. It was now possible to identify the two protuberances emerging from the top of his head as heavily armored vulpine ears because they had thinned at the base. The purple parts of his face had turned red, and the majority of his armored body was either grayish-black or red. His face had grown longer to resemble a snout, with sharp teeth exposed and wide crimson eyes. Muscle bulged from the widening of his neck. His feet had grown long and sharp with articulated toes, and his arms had grown longer and now ended in sharp dagger points. 9 tails swung behind him, each with a needle-like tip. The creature's deep, harsh voice growled, "Well, you weren't who I was looking for, but you'll have to do." He swayed his tails frantically instead of leisurely, and a hideous smile appeared on his face. He held it out tantalizingly and said, "No, please, I'm too pretty to die. Here, you want this video game? It's really fun." Unfortunately, Cell was unaware that it contained an explosive. The bomb was destroyed before it could even function when a tail lashed out and split the handheld game in two. The monstrous creature moved closer to him and said, "I'll take that as a no, then." Cell was thrown through multiple trees when a blur of blue and black suddenly struck his side without any trouble. He stood up and brushed wood pulp from one shoulder. "Oh, there you are, Vegeta. I'm looking forward to absorbing your power and making it my own." The Prince of Saiyans stood in front of the monster, within arm's reach, and grinned smugly up at him. "Hey, I almost feel like waiting to allow you to recall all of your little freaks. I know separating from them likely weakens you." He had not bothered to become Super Saiyan, so his vertically spiky hair remained black. He was dressed simply in a blue sleeveless shirt and black pants. "That is of little consequence. You are simply too weak to oppose me." Vegeta unleashed some of his incredible power and sent Hercule flying away from the sheer release of power, even though he had been running away for some time. "I've been training for centuries. Do you really believe I would allow my power to stagnate?" Vegeta said. Hercule exclaimed, "Oh shit." As he was carried off his feet, he barely avoided plowing into one tree before slamming into and bouncing off of another. When he landed a few seconds later, he took a few moments to catch his breath after standing up, but when the landscape was rocked by another amazing shockwave, he was energized to move again. He muttered to himself, "I really need to get away from here," as his legs exerted all of their energy. Am I really such a bad person? Do I deserve this? Sure, I cheated on my wife a couple times and I took credit for defeating Cell and took a few bribes and bribed a few people, but that's not a sin. Right? It's not like I killed anyone. Aw man. I thought I was such a good person. More shaking? Oh man, this ain't good." With Vegeta floating above Cell, who was now buried a few feet into the ground, Vegeta appeared to be winning the battle. He replied, I'm surprised. Cell, I took this transformation of yours as a sign that you had become less pathetic apparently. I was wrong. I'm just waiting for you to realize that the real me has been behind you this entire time. Cell puffed into thick black smoke as he turned to face Vegeta and lay face up in the ground. He froze and launched a spin kick, but it was too late. Three Tails attempted to skewer him from various angles, and Cell fired multiple tiny ki blasts. Vegeta instantly transformed into a Super Saiyan. Easily dodging the blows and charging at Cell to deal him another powerful blow once more, he fell to the ground with a crash. Use whatever cheap trick you feel like, it makes no difference. The ground trembled under the power of Cell's energy as he said, I suppose it's time I stopped fooling around. In an instant, he shot upward, leveling himself with Vegeta. Vegeta went to Super Saiyan 2, grinning, and remarked, that's more like it, finally a fight worthy of a Saiyan. Vegeta felt the fresh surge of energy. Cell grinned around his sharp teeth and said, be careful, Vegeta, I've learned a few tricks. Karui took a moment to assess him, and Naruto asked, are you crazy like that other kid? Although her eyes were narrowed, she did not appear to be about to fight him as she stood there. I'm not crazy, but you just might be. Me? Is this a game to you? I saw the way you played around during the last match, and let me tell you, if you try and pull any of that, I'll flat out kill you. She sighed. There's something about you I just don't like. You look like someone. Naruto questioned, you don't like me cause I look like someone? And you were talking to the Hokage before all of this, weren't you? Well, yeah, I used to live in Konoha before Piccolo and Popochild abducted me. With a confused expression on his face, he continued, it's not as bad as it sounds. I mean, they fed me and stuff. Also, Piccolo left me on a deserted island for a while. He told me it was character building, but... She pulled out her sword and held it in front of her, saying, I don't want to hear your screwed up life story now. If you don't want a quick death, I suggest you defend yourself. Naruto pulled out his machete and said, so much for being nice. For a while, they faced each other without moving as the weight of their impending battle weighed heavily on their blades. He was the first to move, and his slash was skillfully sidestepped without delay. She wrapped her katana around his machete and lunged at his throat. He turned and kicked at her, reeling backward and sporting a thin cut on his neck. Karui braced the kick with her arm, sharp side out, and raised her katana to block it with quick thinking. Naruto covered his own foot with iron and hit her hard enough to knock her down. She noticed a nick in her blade and gave him a fierce look. Naruto dissolved the iron boot he had made for himself and said, sorry about that. At least it didn't break. As soon as he was done talking, there was a cloud of shuriken between them. He ducked to the side, and Karui appeared. She had already anticipated his destination and was ready to drive her broken sword through him. She was simply too slow, though, so he turned on his front foot and simultaneously grabbed her wrist. After removing the katana from her grasp with the force of his spin, he threw her by the wrist and the back of her shirt using his weight and momentum. She was on the ground in front of him again, giving him a pointless glare. He looked down at the hole in his GI and the tiny amount of blood that was now collecting around the wound, saying, you really aren't bad, ya know? Karui took a moment to catch her breath, threw the bloody kunai away, and continued to breathe deeply. You managed to stab me even while I was throwing you around. Hey, I'm just determined. She sat quietly for a few moments with her fists on the floor and her head bent, saying, I think I finally figured out what your problem is. With his machete in one hand and her katana in the other, Naruto questioned, what's that? She yanked at a bundle of wires that tightened around both of Naruto's legs and pulled with all of her strength, causing him to fall to the ground with the sharp metal slicing into his ankles. You're just too damn nice. Supreme lightning current. She exclaimed. Flashing through multiple hand seals, her hands were electrified, and Naruto followed shortly after. Despite the terrible surging pain that was currently plaguing him, Naruto made a concerted effort to concentrate. After weighing his options, he was able to identify only one that was immediately practical. In one quick motion, he broke through the wire as ki and red chakra burst into life all around him. He drew Karui closer to him and pressed his hand firmly against the side of her neck. Unconscious, she fell to the ground. Feeling let down, Naruto uttered, damn it, I didn't want to rely on that power. The bloodlust that accompanied the Kyuubi's chakra was stronger than he had expected, and he had also almost gone for the kill on that final blow. I need to end the next match without using it. Despite his stomach fighting a war against itself, Piccolo smiled. He felt like he was being torn to pieces. Winner. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto approached him and felt a more intense wave of pain. He flinched and clutched at his stomach. Piccolo? What's wrong? There's no time. We need to end this tournament as quickly as possible. Okay. Piccolo responded. Next is the fighter from Iwagakure. With a shrug, Naruto descended to the ring. Though he believed his mentor was strong enough to defeat almost anything, there was undoubtedly something wrong with Piccolo. A long time ago, Den stood at the entrance to a dark, deep cavern in the middle of the day. He strolled through the rocky vale and into the dark depths of the earth with a sly smile on his face. He paused inside and sent a thin beam of ki out of the tip of his finger, causing the entrance to collapse. His footsteps reverberated throughout the cavern, but no one heard them. Iwagakure's Kuretsuchi was a multifaceted person. She was a girl who had just turned 13. She was a shinobi. She was a huge admirer of the well-known actress Kazuhana Koyuki, who played Yuki Fujikaze in numerous successful films. She liked herself, and she was generally liked by others. The village comes first, so even though this blonde child seemed kind enough, she was determined to kill him at all costs. The only issue is that it was obvious that his strength was far greater than hers. She gained perspective after witnessing him battle the Karui girl from Kumo. Naruto's first battle with Gaara had been odd from the start, so it wasn't a fair assessment of his abilities. It only demonstrated his strength and speed, which she might be able to handle. His skill was demonstrated in the second fight, which was not to be laughed at if she considered this combination carefully. She had few choices. Another major issue was that Naruto was flying down towards her. How can a flying freak be pinned down? Sorry, but I was told to wrap these fights up a bit quicker. Normally, I like talking to people, but, he said, grimacing slightly as he drew his machete and walked over to her. She raised a hand and said, "Wait." He truly stopped. "That was simply fantastic. Who says we can't fight and talk at the same time?" she asked with a smile. What? Lying as much as she could, she claimed, "Listen, I didn't really want to be here. I could care less about the Dragon Ball or whatever. I don't believe in wishes." She was flipping through several hand seals with her hands behind her back. After examining her closely for a while, Naruto nodded and remarked, "Well, you can always forfeit. It isn't against the rules." "I can't forfeit. It's not that simple for me." He raised an eyebrow and leaned his machete against his shoulder, asking, "Why don't you want to be here? Aren't you fighting for your village?" She raised her hand in the air and said, "No, no way. I don't even really want to be a shinobi. I've wanted to be a painter all my life. My grandfather over there just pressures me into being a shinobi to keep the family tradition alive." "A painter, huh?" Naruto asked, grinning and nodding. "That's pretty neat. I've never met someone who paints before. Well, not that I know of." "Oh yeah, I just paint all the time. So many colors." I bet you use one of those little art plate thingies for your paint?" "A color palette? One of those, right? That's really awesome. Do you create paintings for clients? Because I've had this fantastic idea for a very long time. Picture me standing atop a hill, surrounded by dinosaurs, wearing a duster and a..." "Whoa, that's fantastic. The picture is solidifying up here. This is my creative hairdo. Nothing to get the creative juices flowing like this," Kuretsuchi said, grabbing some shinobi wire from her thigh pouch and tying a small top knot of hair up and out of the rest of it. She made the snap decision to do something a little exotic to sell her story. "Well, this is all cool, but I think we need to start fighting now," Naruto said, looking at her doubtfully. He had always heard that artists were weird, but this girl was just too crazy. "It's time to go in for the closer because she oversold it. I always have some printed copies of my work with me, so come on over. I'm always looking for possible commissions." "Really? I suppose it wouldn't hurt to take a quick look maybe after the tournament? I'd really love that adorable Dino painting soon." Before he could say anything, she smiled and said, "No, I couldn't possibly show you. I'm much too shy." "That's right. Now take a look." Naruto approached and leaned in slightly as she slowly unfurled a scroll. She dropped the scroll and instead struck him in the face as hard as she could, sending him stumbling backwards but recovering faster than Kuretsuchi would have liked. "What? You're lying. You are one, aren't you?" Naruto remarked, gesturing to her. "Yes, you're right," Kuretsuchi said with a regretful expression. "I've been deceiving you. Only because I fell in love with you when I first saw you this morning," she said, giving him her best doe eyes and putting her hands together under her chin after removing her hair from the odd topknot. "What? Really?" Naruto blushed slightly and rubbed the back of his head. He had always heard that love made people act strangely, and this girl was an artist, so she was probably a little screwy. Wait, no, she wasn't one, but did she really love him? I don't believe I've ever been loved. One girl might like me, I believe, but, The way Kuretsuchi was staring at him made his stomach turn unwillingly. He remembered a time when he was still in Konoha, when he glanced at a shelf of pornographic magazines and lingered too long before the shopkeeper threw him out. He had always decided to return because he was curious about the attractive girls in front of them, but Piccolo and Popo had kidnapped him before he could do so. "Yes, I think I need you in my life because you're so attractive. I was impressed by your hello." "Wow." She closed her eyes and extended her arms in his direction, saying, "Come here." It had been nice hugging Fu, but this girl was a certified liar, and this girl was not someone he almost considered family, Naruto said, Unsure of what would happen to him if he stepped into her embrace. Okay, a part of him, wanted to risk the hug, so he moved back toward her, and she closed the gap, and they encircled each other with their arms. Naruto grinned after a short while and said, "This is nice." That's right. That scroll that Kuretsuchi dropped had not been forgotten, nor had it been dropped in vain. She had molded the chakra for another genjutsu to lock Naruto's current physical sensations to his nerves, on top of the one she had placed on him at the beginning of the fight, and she stepped on the edge that had been slightly unrolled, dragging it further out, revealing more of the seal underneath. The forced gullibility technique made the victim more receptive to suggestion, which was an excellent infiltration technique. Subtlety was crucial when dealing with such a powerful opponent. She seriously doubted that he was defenseless against genjutsu, so she took advantage of his gullibility and dubious intelligence. Ringside, fight commencement. She's got him under a genjutsu, Sasuke said, grinning at the idea that Naruto was incapable of using genjutsu. Yes, it appears that Naruto is vulnerable to genjutsu, remarked the masked Junin wearing the Sharingan. However, after this, he might be alert for them assuming he prevails. Sasuke balled his fists in anger and glared up at the man, but he said nothing more because the fact that he had a Sharingan was making him crazy. Were the Uchiha's eyes just a commodity after his family had been ripped down from greatness? When Orochimaru began acting out in their early adolescence, before he learned to conceal his insanity, Jiraiya noticed his student's attitude and made the decision to challenge him, something he wished Sarutobi had done. But that boy sure is something, isn't he, Kakashi? He is, in fact, all of that power and speed, along with the Kyuubi's chakra and the benefits of his ancestry. He shook his head, but he does appear to be very innocent. It has been an issue in almost all of his games. Yes, he is too unsophisticated. However, given Sasuke's current state, I don't think he has a chance. Jiraiya said this while giving Sasuke a direct look. Sasuke snarled at Jiraiya, his teeth clenched in rage. There is no question of whether or not I will win. Did you witness his use of the third energy and the red cloak of chakra in the earlier matches? It is incredibly powerful, and I have never seen anything like it. He is practically unstoppable once he uses the Kyuubi's power, and the strange power's force has increased. Sasuke started to respond, but Jiraiya interrupted, saying, "But that's why I'm going to get you a fair fight with him. Of course, either Kakashi or myself could handle him with little difficulty, but for a kid like you, it's just impossible." What? As he took out a scroll and ink, Jiraiya remarked, "Let's just hope this fight lasts a little longer. Even if it's just a few minutes, let's hope I have time." Jiraiya turned when someone approached him from behind and sensed his student's presence. "What's up, Shino?" "A few moments ago, I got a message after successfully dispersing some of my insects throughout the neighborhood during their battle. Naruto volunteered to defeat the Suna Jinchuriki's Biju unless he was lying, which is unlikely given his character. This suggests that he has a foundation in sealing." Jiraiya nodded in agreement, saying, "You're right about that." Shino appeared to be as dependable as ever, exhibiting the unwavering character of his clan. "What do you suggest we do?" "I take it you wanted to give Sasuke a seal that could suppress Naruto's Biju chakra?" inquired Shino. "There is a chance that Naruto could overcome the seal and negate any advantage we managed to gain for Sasuke," Jiraiya confirmed. Confirming that this was his intention. Maybe a different strategy is needed? "Excellent. You're clearly thinking things through. Don't worry. That child will not be able to avoid one of my seals, not while he is engaged in combat with Sasuke." He grinned down at Shino and said, "You let me worry about the seal. In the meantime, go over and work with your teammates. I'm not known as one of the greatest Fuinjutsu specialists in the world for nothing." Jiraiya watched him leave. "Shikamaru has something interesting cooked up and he could use your input." Naruto appeared to be completely engrossed in the genjutsu, as evidenced by the fact that he was hugging the girl from Iwa. "Naruto, do you have a question?" Kuretsuchi's voice was melodic to him, and he happily kept her in his arms. Just enjoying the very rare contact with another human being, he let out a slurred response. Her voice was farther away now. "You actually are kinda cute. I suppose you're also decent enough. It's not personal, but you shouldn't have met an Iwagakure ninja. Just die. Lava release." Naruto nearly purred as she spoke, swaying slightly from side to side. So Kuro-kwan thought he was cute. Now that he thought about it, he should never have crossed an Iwa shinobi. The seal would work more slowly without physical contact, but in this case it didn't matter. She activated the seal by pumping some chakra through a chakra string she had made, causing a bubbling pool of lava to spew forth. Lava is such a Kuretsuchi thing to say, he thought, still enjoying the delusion of holding Kuretsuchi to the outside world. Naruto was being slowly cooked as he stood in a shin-deep mound of lava. Oh, so his cute girlfriend thought that he should die? That was just adorable? Well, with a pointed glance up at Piccolo and Popo, she said, If anyone cares about this kid's life, they should throw in the towel and forfeit for him. Her plea was met with cool indifference, and she felt helpless. Fine. I tried to spare him. She formed the hand seals for just you that would allow for a clean kill shot. A battle was going on inside Naruto's head. What is that burning smell? He asked, a hint of logic seeping into his confused mind. Kuretsuchi smelled way nicer than this before. She smelled like girly stuff and dirt, but in a good way. The burning stench was starting to overwhelm his senses until he could take it no more, and a pain. When Naruto opened his eyes for the first time in minutes, he saw the glow of lava consuming his legs and the searing pain that comes with being melted. There was no air in his lungs, and he was going into shock as a huge spike of earth rose from the earth to impale him through the heart. Suddenly, he realized the reality of his predicament, and the shock of the extreme pain he was experiencing only served to startle him into action without thinking. Naruto submerged himself deeply into the Kyuubi's chakra. Kuretsuchi could only watch in horror as her meticulously planned strategy was ruined, and she had to avoid the fat globs of molten lava that were blown away from Naruto by the storm of red, orange, and blue energies that swirled around him in a tight helix. Rock fragments began to fall all over the ring, and she realized right away that her rending earth spike technique was no longer in use. The black, dead skin flaked off before her eyes as if it had never been there, and his many wounds closed one after another. Observing the insane and feral expression on Naruto's face, she uttered, I understand now that I see it before my own eyes. I understand what a Jinchuriki really is. A very bad weapon considering Iwa's resident Jinchuriki, who was terminally absent from his home village but was well liked on the few occasions he did visit, she said. At least Roshi can control his beast. Kuretsuchi threw a few shuriken at Naruto, but they were unable to penetrate his swirling aura, and throwing a chakra-intensive ninjutsu at him did not seem feasible either. Naruto did not react to her, just stood there in the middle of swirling energy. It was evident that her genjutsu had been stripped away by the searing power of his Biju chakra. All she could hope for was an opportunity. With a purple sphere of ki gathered in front of him, Naruto extended his hand and exclaimed, Narugan. The purple sphere of ki remained intact until it exploded against the barrier's side like a grenade. Kuretsuchi had to avoid the ki attack, and as soon as she moved to avoid it, Naruto started rapidly approaching her. As she leapt away from the explosion of ki and chakra that resulted from his attack hitting the barrier, she chastised herself for underestimating her opponent. So that's what he was waiting for. He performed that powerful attack as a distraction. He was upon her, and before she could even raise an arm, he kicked her forcefully in the chest, causing her to reel from the blow while scurrying through hand seals. Earth armor. Her torso, face, neck, upper arms, and legs were covered in a thick layer of earthen material. This proved to be a wise choice because Naruto's kick was immediately followed by a barrage of blows to the stomach and then an overhead right that struck with all the force of a guillotine. His clawed fingers spread out. Red and blue chakra pooled over the sharp points and backs of his hands, forming a cloak that resembled a fox's claws. She was cornered by a furious bull in the middle of a coliseum, and her maleta had just been ripped to pieces. Although the armor she had made was short-lived, it had served its purpose, and she was starting to wish she had accepted her grandfather's offer of a second lava release scroll, which might have come in handy right now. She had one technique in her arsenal that might work, but it would be impossible to use it accurately given Naruto's incredibly fast speed. When he caught her with a stiff uppercut to her chin, which sent her flying into the air, Naruto interrupted her train of thought. In an instant, he was up beside her, his arms busy letting loose punches, and she absorbed the blows in silent pain, each one taking her farther away from consciousness than the last. He kept punching until they hit the ground, and Kuretsuchi landed like a ragdoll and rolled until she was lying there spread eagle. He pursued her and raised his hand, chakra claws ready to strike her, and she was staring up at him in a daze. Onoki was making a commotion and yelling something that his deafened ears could not hear, and his own blood rushed like thunder through his veins, his heartbeat matching the roar of his own power and fury. At that moment, he wanted her dead. After a moment of trembling, his hand froze and he reached back for his machete instead, using the sharp points of his nails to rip straight through the cloth covering of its handle, revealing a magical ray based around an encircled pentagram. The machete's metal glowed red and blue, burning with barely contained power. He pointed the blade up at a higher portion of the barrier with both hands, and a huge beam in the shape of a helix erupted from its tip. His three energies, the orange of his ki, the red of the Kyuubi's chakra, and the blue of his own chakra. The beam tore a hole through the ostensibly indestructible barrier and proceeded straight out of the atmosphere and into space before dissipating as the barrier swiftly reknit itself. Naruto stood there, wheezing and numbly holding his weapon in the air, looking down to see that Kuretsuchi was not there beneath him. His head whipped around and his barely open eyes widened, but it was too late. Kuretsuchi already had a kunai pointed at the base of his spine and another at his throat. It doesn't matter, she said in a small, weakened voice. A shinobi of Iwagakure will not be stopped so easily, regardless of how much of a beast you are. She pressed the knife closer to his throat, creating a thin line of blood, her arms shaking as she struggled to hold onto her kunai. The sole explanation: if only I were strong enough in order to cut your throat. Even as she collapsed unconscious to the ground, she screamed out that final resentful sentence. Naruto turned to face the girl he had just vanquished, deciding that this fight was pointless. He headed back up towards Piccolo, stopping only to drop his melted and ruined machete on the ring floor behind him. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. I completed the seal just in time. There's a good chance you can put an end to this right now. Sasuke eagerly grabbed the scroll from Jiraiya, saying, don't think that this battle will be easy because he is exhausted after that fight, and Shikamaru and Shino have helped you analyze all of Naruto's weaknesses. Don't forget that he has almost limitless stamina because he is a Biju container. Sasuke simply nodded and folded his arms across his chest. All right, now go out there and win. Sasuke, the only reason I'm harsh with you is because you have a terrible attitude and a lot of potential over the past few years. You've grown stronger and more mature. What matters is that I am confident in your ability to accomplish this. You can bring Naruto home, I'm sure of it. Jiraiya stood there looking unhappy as Sasuke gave a non-committal nod and turned to leave. Sasuke believed that either killing Naruto in the ring or returning him to Konoha would demonstrate his superiority over the blonde boy who annoyed him for no apparent reason. Killing him is just as good, he thought, glaring up at Naruto. Maybe better. Over the ring, are you able to fight? As stony as ever, Piccolo asked. I can't wait to be done with all of this fighting, Naruto said with a feeble nod. It's enjoyable, but... Piccolo helpfully added, it's less fun when your life is on the line. It's less fun when other people's lives are on the line, Naruto said, shaking his head. I nearly killed that girl, and like me, she is only fighting for the people she cares about. That's why this pointless competition baffles me. You brought back the Dragon Balls, but why? I don't know, Piccolo said, shaking his head once more. I simply don't know, he said, his eyes going hollow as he put his hand to his mouth and forced something out of his throat. Just get in there and fight. Just fight. I don't give a damn about your worries. Piccolo? Naruto, just go down to the ring. They've collected Kuretsuchi? Popo's eyes were wider than usual, if that were possible, and the Namekian turned his head to look at the genie. Naruto was wearing a dejected expression that Popo had not seen since the days when he watched Naruto's life in Konoha as required. Naruto drifted down to where Sasuke was waiting for him, a smirk on his face and sinister intent in his eyes. Hold on, Naruto. Before he could get too far away, Popo grabbed him in midair and said, take this. It might help you. He gave Naruto a machete that resembled his old one, saying, it's not as good as the one Piccolo made, but... Is the array present on this? It does. Popo was horrified to witness Naruto rip the machete's handles wrapping off and use a summoned kunai to make a deep scratch through the array of etchings. Why did you do that? I don't require it. He tossed his weapon over his shoulder and proceeded to descend, declaring, I will never use that power again. Popo shook his head at Naruto's bravado, but he concluded it was time to address the major issue. Piccolo smiled and said, it seems you've caught on already. We always did have a connection. His eyes were glazed over as they followed Popo's slow drift in his direction. I ought to have known. How could I have missed it? I was that person. Piccolo's mouth kept moving while grinning, saying, the only question now is what you can possibly do to stop me. You'd be surprised with how much you can do with Namekian magic. The only person who can interfere with me in this body is you. A miserable excuse for an attendant. There is nothing you can do. And even those helpless kids the boy battles could easily kill you. The magic carpet was still floating there, where Popo had been standing on it, and Piccolo suddenly appeared behind him. No one will see this. I've arranged for them not to. His green hand pierced through Popo's chest from behind, dissipating him into mist despite his struggle. Have fun back at the lookout. Carelessly, he cut through the enchanted fabric with his hands and threw the pieces into the barrier to burn up into nothing. Let's watch some violence now. For an attendant, there is nothing you can do. And even those helpless kids the boy battles could easily kill you. The magic carpet was still floating there, where Popo had been standing on it, and Piccolo suddenly appeared behind him. No one will see this. I've arranged for them not to. His green hand pierced through Popo's chest from behind, dissipating him into mist despite his struggle. Have fun back at the lookout. Carelessly, he cut through the enchanted fabric with his hands and threw the pieces into the barrier to burn up into nothing. Let's watch some violence now.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.